One wrong voice can pull a child away from truth, but one praying parent can bring them back from the edge. Tonight, this message may change the destiny of your children forever. No child wakes up one morning and suddenly becomes distant from their values, their family, or their own conscience. It rarely happens in one dramatic moment. Most of the time, the change is almost invisible in the beginning. A small silence appears where there used to be trust. A new attitude replaces humility. Respect slowly turns into indifference. The child who once spoke openly now hides things behind short answers and closed doors. And because these changes arrive quietly, many parents fail to notice them until the emotional distance has already grown too large. What destroys many families is not always a single catastrophe, but a collection of ignored moments that slowly shape the direction of a young life. The danger of drifting is precisely that it looks harmless at first. One wrong friendship does not seem dangerous. One lie appears insignificant. One act of disrespect gets excused because they are young. 1 hour of bad influence becomes many nights of emotional separation. Human beings adapt very quickly, especially children. What shocks them today becomes normal tomorrow. That is why moral decline often begins with tolerance towards small compromises. A child learns to justify behaviors little by little, until eventually they no longer recognize the difference between freedom and self-destruction. The process is gradual, subtle, and deeply emotional. Many parents believe they will recognize the exact moment their children begin losing their way. But life rarely announces those moments loudly. Sometimes it begins with loneliness, sometimes with resentment, sometimes with a desperate need to belong somewhere. A child who feels unseen will often search for validation in the wrong places, and the world is always ready to offer temporary comfort to wounded hearts. Social pressure, toxic influences, empty trends, and emotional confusion can slowly pull young people away from the principles that once protected them. Not because they are evil, but because they are vulnerable. The modern world constantly competes for the attention of children. Every screen speaks to them. Every platform tries to shape their identity. They are surrounded by voices telling them who they should become, what they should desire, and how they should measure their worth. Day after day, they consume messages that glorify arrogance, instant pleasure, superficial success, and emotional emptiness. And while parents are often busy trying to provide a better future, many children are silently absorbing values that weaken their character. The tragedy is that corruption rarely presents itself as corruption. It presents itself as entertainment, popularity, independence, or freedom. A child does not usually walk toward darkness believing it is darkness. Most of the time, they believe they are simply following the crowd, protecting themselves from rejection, or trying to survive emotionally. That is why judgment alone never solves the problem. A parent must understand that behind many destructive behaviors, there is often confusion, pain, insecurity, or emotional hunger. Sometimes children become rebellious, not because they hate guidance, but because they feel disconnected from love, understanding, and purpose. And when emotional emptiness grows, dangerous influences begin to look attractive. This is why presence matters so deeply. Not only physical presence, but emotional presence, listening without immediate condemnation, observing changes without pretending they are unimportant, creating spaces where children feel safe enough to speak honestly about fear, pressure, failure, temptation, and identity. Many families only begin serious conversations after the damage becomes obvious, but wisdom notices the small changes before they become permanent patterns. The child who feels heard today may avoid becoming completely lost tomorrow. Parents often underestimate the power of small daily actions: a conversation at dinner, a sincere question, a moment of affection, a correction made with patience instead of humiliation. These simple moments may appear ordinary, but they slowly build emotional foundations strong enough to resist outside pressure. Just as children drift away little by little, they are also guided back little by little. Trust is built gradually. Character is formed gradually. Wisdom grows gradually. Every word, every example, every act of love leaves an invisible mark on the soul of a child. There are many parents who believe that love means avoiding conflict at all costs. They stay silent when they should speak because they fear losing the affection of their children. They ignore disrespect because they hope time will correct it naturally. They watch dangerous behaviors develop and convince themselves that it is only a temporary phase. But silence, when truth is necessary, can slowly become a form of abandonment. A child does not only need affection and protection, a child also needs guidance, correction, and moral direction. When parents remain silent in moments that require courage, children may interpret that silence as permission, indifference, or emotional absence. Anger can wound, but silence can confuse the soul. At least anger reveals that something matters. Silence often leaves children alone with their own impulses, surrounded by influences that do not care about their future. A child who grows without boundaries may initially feel powerful and unrestricted, but deep inside there is usually insecurity. Human beings, especially during youth, search for structure even when they resist it outwardly. Limits create emotional safety. Guidance provides orientation. Without those things, many children begin building their identity based on the opinions of strangers, unstable emotions, or temporary trends that change constantly. Some parents remain silent because they are exhausted. Life becomes heavy, responsibilities multiply, emotional energy disappears. After long days of work and stress, confronting difficult conversations with children feels overwhelming. It becomes easier to avoid tension than to address uncomfortable truths. But children continue evolving every day, whether parents engage with them or not. Their beliefs are being shaped constantly. Their habits are being formed constantly. And if a parent chooses silence repeatedly, other voices will eventually occupy that empty space. The world never stops speaking to young minds. Social media speaks, friends speak, entertainment speaks, peer pressure speaks, and many of those voices offer immediate pleasure without wisdom, freedom without responsibility, and confidence without character. There are also parents who stay silent because they carry guilt from their own past mistakes. They feel unworthy of correcting their children because they remember their own failures, weaknesses, or regrets. They fear sounding hypocritical. But children do not need perfect parents. They need honest parents. A father who admits his mistakes while teaching truth still becomes a source of wisdom. A mother who speaks from experience rather than superiority can still guide with authority. In fact, vulnerability often creates stronger emotional connection than perfection ever could. Children respect authenticity far more deeply than appearances. Silence becomes especially dangerous when children are clearly struggling emotionally. Many young people today carry anxiety, loneliness, confusion, anger, and hidden sadness behind carefully constructed masks. Some become louder to hide their pain, others become quieter. Some isolate themselves emotionally while pretending everything is fine. Parents sometimes notice these changes but avoid addressing them because they fear hearing painful truths. Yet avoidance never heals wounds. Emotional distance grows stronger when nobody dares to speak honestly. A child who feels emotionally invisible may eventually stop trying to be understood at all. Guidance is not the same as control. Speaking truth does not mean destroying trust. The strongest parents are not those who dominate with fear, but those who combine firmness with compassion. Children need conversations that challenge them without humiliating them. They need correction that protects dignity instead of attacking identity. When discipline is rooted in love rather than ego, it teaches responsibility instead of resentment. Silence may feel peaceful in the moment, but long-term silence often creates deeper chaos because unresolved problems continue growing in darkness. Many families only communicate about practical responsibilities, school, schedules, rules, obligations, performance, but children also need conversations about values, pain, relationships, temptation, disappointment, identity, and purpose. They need adults willing to speak about life honestly, instead of pretending difficult realities do not exist. A parent who courageously enters uncomfortable conversations gives children something extremely valuable: emotional guidance in a confusing world, because many young people are not searching for someone who approves of everything they do. Deep inside, they are searching for someone wise enough to tell them the truth while still loving them completely. When silence dominates a home, emotional distance slowly becomes normal. Children stop sharing details about their lives because they no longer expect meaningful connection. Parents stop asking deeper questions because they fear rejection or conflict. Over time, everyone learns how to coexist physically while remaining emotionally separated. And one of the saddest realities in life is that families can live under the same roof while becoming strangers to one another, little by little. Many parents believe that loving their children means protecting them from discomfort, disappointment, or frustration. They try to become friends instead of guides. They avoid discipline because they fear damaging the relationship. They say yes too often because they do not want their children to feel rejected. But love without direction can become dangerous. Affection alone cannot prepare a child for the realities of life. A child who receives unlimited approval without wisdom may grow emotionally fragile, unable to distinguish between desire and responsibility, freedom and recklessness, confidence and arrogance. True love is not measured by how much we give children, but by how well we prepare them to face the world with integrity and emotional strength. There is a profound difference between making children happy and helping them grow. Happiness is temporary and emotional. Growth is uncomfortable, slow, and deeply transformative. Many parents unintentionally sacrifice long-term character for short-term peace. They rescue children from every consequence. They excuse every mistake. They defend behaviors that should be corrected. And while this may create temporary comfort, it often prevents emotional maturity from developing. Children begin to believe that life should always adjust to their emotions instead of learning how to manage emotions with wisdom and responsibility. Eventually, the world confronts them with realities their parents never taught them how to face. Guidance is one of the purest forms of love because it requires courage. It is easy to please a child in the moment. It is much harder to teach patience, discipline, accountability, humility, and respect. These lessons are not always welcomed immediately. In fact, many children resist boundaries because boundaries force them to confront limits they do not yet understand. But limits are essential for emotional development. Without them, children may grow up believing that every impulse deserves expression and every desire deserves fulfillment. This mindset creates confusion because human beings are not designed to live wisely without self-control. The modern world often promotes the idea that children should never feel uncomfortable, criticized, or challenged. Yet discomfort is a necessary part of becoming emotionally resilient. A child who never hears no may struggle later with rejection, disappointment, and responsibility. A child who is never corrected may grow unable to recognize the impact of their behavior on others, and a child who receives constant praise without meaningful guidance may build confidence on illusion rather than substance. Real confidence comes from learning discipline, overcoming difficulty, accepting correction, and developing inner stability through experience and growth. Some parents confuse guidance with harshness and therefore avoid it completely. But guidance does not mean controlling every aspect of a child's life. it does not mean destroying individuality or demanding perfection. Healthy guidance creates clarity, not fear. It teaches children how to think, not simply what to obey. It explains why values matter instead of imposing rules without meaning. Children need adults who can help them understand consequences, relationships, emotional responsibility, and moral choices in a world filled with confusion and contradiction. Love without guidance often leaves children emotionally unprepared for temptation and pressure. The world constantly offers shortcuts that appear attractive in the beginning, but destructive in the end. Young people are surrounded by messages encouraging instant gratification, superficial validation, emotional impulsiveness, and selfish ambition. Without strong internal values, many children drift toward whatever gives immediate approval or pleasure. And when parents avoid difficult conversations about ethics, identity, relationships, and personal responsibility, children are forced to navigate complex realities without emotional tools strong enough to protect them. Guidance also teaches children that actions have consequences. This understanding is essential for developing maturity. When parents remove every obstacle and protect children from every failure, they unintentionally weaken their ability to handle life independently. Failure, disappointment, and accountability are painful experiences, but they often become the greatest teachers of wisdom, empathy, patience, and resilience. A child who learns to take responsibility for mistakes develops strength of character that cannot be created through comfort alone. Children deeply need emotional warmth, but they also need moral structure. They need parents who listen with compassion while still standing firmly for truth. They need affection that reassures them they are loved and guidance that reminds them they are capable of becoming better. Without direction, love can become emotionally indulgent instead of transformative. And when children grow up without clear values, they often spend years searching for stability, purpose, and identity in places that can never truly satisfy the deeper needs of the human soul. Every generation faces challenges, but the modern world surrounds children with influences more constant, more persuasive, and more invasive than ever before. The battle for the minds of young people no longer begins outside the home alone. It enters through screens, conversations, trends, entertainment, advertisements, and endless streams of information that follow them everywhere. Children wake up connected to a world that constantly tells them how they should look, what they should desire, what success means, and how much they are worth. Day after day, these voices shape their thinking little by little, often without parents fully realizing how deeply those messages penetrate the emotional and spiritual life of a child. The greatest danger is not always obvious evil. In many cases, the most destructive influences arrive disguised as normality. Arrogance is presented as confidence. Emotional coldness is called independence. Vanity is celebrated as self-expression. Excessive self-focus is described as empowerment. Young people absorb these ideas repeatedly until unhealthy attitudes begin to feel natural. And because the world rewards visibility more than depth, many children grow up believing that attention is more valuable than character. They learn how to impress others before learning how to understand themselves. Social media has created an environment where comparison never rests. Children compare their appearance, achievements, popularity, relationships, and lifestyles against carefully edited versions of other people's lives. Even emotionally strong adults struggle under this pressure, yet children are expected to navigate it while still discovering their identity. Many young people become emotionally exhausted trying to meet impossible standards created by strangers online. They begin measuring their worth through approval, reactions, and temporary validation instead of developing inner confidence rooted in truth, values, and self-respect. At the same time, The speed of modern life leaves very little room for reflection. Everything moves quickly. Entertainment is immediate. Opinions are immediate. Desires are immediate. Young minds become accustomed to constant stimulation and instant gratification. Patience becomes difficult. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Deep thinking becomes rare. Many children are growing up in environments where distraction is constant and emotional depth is disappearing. They know how to consume information, but not always how to process wisdom. They can communicate constantly, yet still feel profoundly lonely inside. The world also teaches children to fear vulnerability. Many young people hide their pain behind humor, confidence, or isolation because society often rewards appearances more than authenticity. Boys are taught to suppress emotion. Girls are pressured to seek perfection. Both are exposed to unrealistic expectations about identity, beauty, success, and relationships. Underneath these pressures, countless children quietly struggle with insecurity, confusion, anxiety, and emotional emptiness. Some lose themselves trying to become acceptable to others because they were never taught that their value does not depend on public approval. Parents sometimes underestimate how exhausting this environment truly is for children. Every day, they are exposed to influences competing for their loyalty, attention, and identity. Some influences encourage selfishness. Others normalize disrespect, addiction, dishonesty, or emotional numbness. Many children are taught to chase pleasure without understanding purpose. They are encouraged to express every emotion impulsively rather than learning emotional discipline and wisdom. Over time, these messages slowly shape the way they view themselves, relationships, morality, and even love itself. This is why the role of parents has become more important than ever. Providing material comfort alone is not enough in a world that constantly pulls children in conflicting directions. Young people need emotional anchors strong enough to help them resist destructive influences. They need conversations about values, dignity, responsibility, compassion, humility, and truth. They need examples of integrity inside the home because outside the home, they will encounter countless examples of confusion. Children must learn that not everything popular is healthy, not everything celebrated is honorable, and not everything that feels good leads to peace. The battle for the soul of a child is often invisible at first. It happens quietly through repeated exposure, emotional loneliness, unresolved pain, unhealthy influences, and gradual compromise. A child rarely announces the moment they begin losing direction internally. The change often happens through small shifts in priorities, attitudes, habits, and emotional sensitivity. That is why parents cannot afford emotional absence. Presence matters, listening matters, guidance matters. Children need adults willing to help them interpret the world critically instead of absorbing everything blindly. A child who understands their worth deeply becomes harder to manipulate. A child who learns self-respect becomes less desperate for approval. A child grounded in strong values develops inner resistance against destructive pressure. But these qualities do not appear automatically. They are cultivated slowly through attention, example, wisdom, correction, emotional connection, and consistent truth spoken with love. Many people see prayer as a last resort, something parents turn to only when every other solution has failed. But prayer is not surrender in the negative sense. It is not passivity, denial, or emotional escape. True prayer is an act of deep awareness. It is the recognition that human beings cannot control every influence surrounding their children, no matter how much love, discipline, or protection they provide. Parents can guide, teach, correct, support, and sacrifice endlessly. But there will always be moments when children step into places where parental hands cannot reach. And it is in those moments that prayer becomes more than words. It becomes spiritual protection born from love, fear, hope, and faith. There are battles happening inside children that many parents never fully see. Some children carry silent loneliness. Others struggle with insecurity, temptation, confusion, anger, or emotional emptiness. Some appear strong externally while collapsing internally. Parents often try to solve visible problems while remaining unaware of the invisible wounds growing beneath the surface. Prayer forces the heart to acknowledge those unseen realities. It reminds parents that not every danger comes with warning signs and not every crisis announces itself loudly. Sometimes the greatest struggles exist quietly inside the mind and soul long before they appear through behavior. Modern life encourages people to believe they can solve everything through control, strategy, and external success. Yet countless parents discover that money cannot guarantee wisdom, education cannot guarantee character, and opportunities cannot guarantee peace. A child may have access to comfort, technology, privilege, and freedom while still feeling spiritually lost inside. This is why prayer remains powerful. It addresses the part of human beings that achievements alone cannot heal. It speaks to the inner life where identity, conscience, emotional strength, and moral direction are formed. Prayer also changes the heart of the parent. Many parents pray believing the only goal is to change their children, but sincere prayer often transforms the person praying first. It softens pride, it creates patience, it develops compassion, it forces self-reflection. A parent praying deeply for a child begins to recognize their own fears, mistakes, limitations, and emotional wounds more honestly. Instead of reacting only with anger or panic, prayer creates space for wisdom and emotional clarity. It reminds parents that guidance requires not only authority, but humility and consistency. Some parents only speak to their children about behavior, responsibilities, or achievements. Prayer encourages them to think beyond external performance and focus on the deeper condition of the soul. It shifts the question from, "Are my children successful?" to, "Are my children becoming good, honest, compassionate, emotionally grounded human beings?" These are not the same thing. A child may achieve recognition while remaining internally empty. They may appear confident while secretly struggling with identity and purpose. Prayer keeps parents focused on what truly matters beyond appearances. There are moments when parents feel powerless, watching their children make painful choices. Advice gets rejected, warnings get ignored, emotional distance grows. In those moments, prayer becomes an act of hope against despair. Not naive hope, but persistent hope rooted in the belief that human beings can still change, heal, awaken, and return from destructive paths. Many children who once seemed completely lost eventually rediscover purpose because someone never stopped believing in them, loving them, and praying for them even during the darkest periods of their lives. Prayer is also a form of emotional vigilance. It keeps parents attentive to subtle changes in their children. A praying parent often becomes more observant, more emotionally present, and more sensitive to what remains unspoken. They begin noticing loneliness hidden behind silence, fear hidden behind anger, and confusion hidden behind rebellion. Prayer creates deeper emotional connection because it teaches parents to look beyond surface behavior and recognize the humanity beneath it. In a world filled with distractions, temptations, false values, and emotional instability, children need more than material protection. They need moral and spiritual grounding strong enough to help them resist influences that slowly erode character and conscience. Prayer becomes part of building that foundation, not as empty ritual, but as daily intentional concern for the emotional and spiritual well-being of the people parents love most. Because there are moments in life when guidance alone feels insufficient, words feel powerless, and human strength feels limited, yet love continues speaking through quiet prayers whispered in fear, hope, exhaustion, and unwavering devotion. One of the deepest pains a parent can experience is the feeling of watching a child slowly become someone they no longer recognize. The child who once trusted openly becomes distant. The innocence that once filled the home seems replaced by anger, coldness, rebellion, or emotional emptiness. Some parents carry silent grief for years because they feel they have lost their children emotionally, morally, or spiritually. They replay past decisions endlessly in their minds, wondering where they failed, what they missed, and whether the damage can still be repaired. But one of the most dangerous things despair does is convince people that change is no longer possible, and that belief destroys hope long before reality does. Human beings are far more complex than the worst decisions they make. A child who appears lost today may still carry goodness buried beneath confusion, pain, pride, fear, or emotional wounds that nobody fully understands. Many young people drift into destructive behaviors not because they are permanently broken, but because they are searching for identity, belonging, meaning, or relief from inner emptiness. Some become trapped in harmful environments. Others make impulsive choices while emotionally vulnerable. Some harden themselves after disappointment, rejection, or unresolved pain. Yet, even in those moments, the possibility of awakening still exists within them. Life has a mysterious way of confronting people with truth over time. There are lessons that cannot be taught through lectures alone. Some children only begin to understand the value of love after experiencing loneliness. Some only recognize wisdom after suffering consequences. Some only appreciate guidance after becoming exhausted by chaos. Pain often becomes a teacher that reveals what comfort once concealed. This is why parents must be careful not to confuse temporary rebellion with permanent destruction. The human soul is capable of transformation in ways that logic alone cannot predict. Many parents lose hope because they focus only on visible behavior. They see the anger, disrespect, addictions, dishonesty, or emotional distance and assume the child no longer cares. But external behavior does not always reveal the entire truth of what is happening internally. Some children build emotional walls because they are ashamed. Others act aggressively because they are deeply insecure. Some pretend not to care because vulnerability feels dangerous to them. Underneath many destructive patterns, there is still a wounded human being searching for meaning, acceptance, and peace. Redemption rarely happens instantly. It is usually a gradual process filled with setbacks, reflection, struggle, and painful honesty. A child who has lost direction emotionally or morally may need time to recognize the emptiness of the path they are following. They may resist help before eventually seeking it. They may reject wisdom before finally understanding its value. Transformation is often messy and unpredictable, but the possibility of return should never be dismissed simply because progress is slow or imperfect. Parents also need to understand that unconditional love does not mean approving harmful behavior. Real love can remain present while still maintaining truth, boundaries, and accountability. Supporting redemption does not require tolerating destruction. In fact, some children begin changing only after consequences force them to confront reality honestly. Compassion without wisdom can enable harmful patterns, while wisdom without compassion can push wounded people deeper into despair. The challenge is learning how to remain loving without abandoning truth. There are countless stories of people who once seemed completely lost, but later rebuilt their lives, relationships, and character. Human beings can evolve dramatically when they encounter truth deeply enough. Sometimes a conversation changes them. Sometimes suffering changes them. Sometimes the quiet realization that someone never stopped loving them becomes the beginning of their healing. A parent's continued belief in a child can become a powerful force during moments when the child has stopped believing in themselves. This is why parents must guard against bitterness and hopelessness. Despair creates emotional distance that children often feel immediately. When parents emotionally give up, children may begin believing they truly are beyond redemption. But hope communicates something different. Hope says, I see your mistakes, but I still believe there is more inside you than your worst moments. That kind of belief can become life changing because many struggling young people secretly fear they are permanently damaged, unworthy of forgiveness, or incapable of becoming better. No human life moves in a perfectly straight line. Many people wander before they mature. Many fall before they learn wisdom. Many lose themselves temporarily before discovering who they truly are. The journey back toward truth, dignity, emotional health, and moral clarity may take time, but as long as conscience still exists within the human heart, the possibility of return remains alive.